whether being given messages, experiencing the beauty of the afterlife, or being terrified right back into this world. These people all have one thing in common, and that is that they claim to have seen God. Let's dive right into these stories as we cover the top 10 real people who saw God. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Eben Alexander. Eben is a Harvard neurosurgeon, and for much of his life he was skeptical about religion and God. That all changed in 2012, however, when, after a near-death experience, he returned talking about how he had visited heaven. He explains his story saying that he was surrounded by butterflies and was told by a woman that he had nothing to fear at all while he was there in heaven. Aside from the butterflies in this interaction, he also remembers a bunch of transparent beings, particularly birds. These birds were flying high above him, but one thing about them really stuck with him. He said, quote, "Again, thinking about it later, it occurred to me that the joy of these creatures, as they soared along, was such that they had to make this noise. That if the joy didn't come out of them this way, then they simply would not otherwise be able to contain it." In our number 9 spot today, we have 45 years. In 1943, Dr. George Ritchie died of pneumonia, but after 9 long minutes he came back and was sure to tell the tale of what happened while he was gone. He went on to write a book called Return from Tomorrow and My Life After Dying. He recounts a lot of stuff in this book, from an out-of-body experience to meeting people, but the last thing he remembered was meeting someone who he calls God. He explains that God left him a mental message that told him, quote, "It is left to humanity which direction they shall choose. I came to this planet to show you through the life I led how to love. Without our Father you can do nothing, neither could I. I showed you this. You have 45 years. When he came back to his body, he explained that his throat was on fire and that he felt weight on his chest that was crushing to him. I'm not exactly sure what this message was supposed to mean. I mean, mostly the whole 45 years thing. Dr. Ritchie passed away in 2007, which was almost 64 years after his near-death experience, but whatever this message was intended to mean, that was probably the coolest and most terrifying thing in the world. In our number 8 spot today, we have the gates of hell. Veronica Ulrich Barthel was 22 years old in 1981, and that is when she was struck by lightning while she was driving. When she got struck by lightning, she began having an out-of-body experience. She said she could see herself holding the steering wheel with burned hands, which sounds absolutely terrifying. She then said she went on a journey through a tunnel which led her to be standing in front of a gate that read, "Welcome to hell." Yeah, okay, I thought the burned hands were bad, but this might be worse. She then explains that she was brought to a waiting room, which sounds a lot like hell, and that she could see people suffering in torment. She then said that she met someone who she presumed to be Jesus or God, and he sent her back to her body. When she came back into this physical world, apparently all she could do was scream, "I was dead and in hell," over and over and over again. This is definitely one of the stories on this list that is significantly more terrifying than blissful. In our number 7 spot today, we have Laura. This story comes from a woman named Laura who had a near-death experience after a car accident in 1986. She said that while she was dead, she found herself in front of both God and Jesus. She said, quote, "Jesus asked me if I wanted to see where I was. I nodded yes. He showed me that he, God, was in front of me and wearing a white robe, sitting on a tall white chair. I was at his feet, kneeling with the back of my thighs on my calves in an almost sitting position. I had my hands covering my face and was crying." Laura explained that God was kind of hidden by a round cloud, but she could definitely see parts of him. Apparently, then Jesus said he needed to ask God if she could return to Earth, after which Jesus was very excited by him saying yes. The next thing Laura remembers is waking up in the hospital back on Earth. In our number 6 spot today, we have Velu. This story comes from a man named Velu. Many years ago, Velu was at Nalamudi Punjalai in Valpuri when he had his encounter with his god called Lord Muruga. While this viewpoint is absolutely stunning, it didn't become famous and popular until after Velu's experience. He explains that God arrived in human form through a bolt of lightning. He also explains that God was very handsome, which I love. This experience very obviously shaped Velu, as he has been going back to the same spot every day since that day to try and meet God again. Velu actually lives out in this area now and takes care of it as if it is a temple, and he is also a farmer who survives off of the different fruit, vegetables, and herbs. He also says that the wild animals don't bother him or try to hurt him at all. If you ever travel to the area, it is very, very likely that you will hear Velu with his chants as he shouts to the sky in prayer. In our number 5 spot today, we have Crystal McVea. Crystal McVea passed away for a short time in 2009 after she experienced complications complications with pancreatitis. She says that when she woke up, she was in heaven and was greeted by 2 angels along with God himself. This is what Crystal had to say about this experience, quote, "What I saw and felt was just this beautiful, radiant, glowing light. That's the only word I can even think to describe it. But I was very aware that I was in front of the presence of the one true God. I'm a Christian. I believe it was the presence of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit." After this, she was posed with the question of whether or not she wanted to stay in heaven or if she wanted to return to her mother on earth. Crystal actually chose to stay in heaven, but as she got closer to the gates, she said that God showed her a vision of a little girl playing, and this is when she knew that it was his way of telling her that she needed to go back to earth so that she could raise her family. In our number 4 spot today, we have Rhonda Brown. This story actually comes from a most amazing top 10 viewer who goes by the name of Rhonda Brown. Rhonda left a comment on one of our videos about her experience seeing God, and this seems like a perfectly lovely time to share it with everyone. She wrote, quote, "I had an experience when I was pregnant with my daughter. I had internal bleeding and had emergency surgery. I felt myself rising to the ceiling. I went through the ceiling and found myself in a beautiful place. The colors were so bright it hurt my eyes, and it was every color ever I was seeing at once. Jesus told me I had the choice. My daughter and I could stay or go back. He told me if we stayed, it's fine, but if I chose to go back, my daughter would be fine. He let me see my family in the waiting room crying. I couldn't do this to them, so I came back. My daughter is 14 now and is such a loving child." Rhonda, what a wild story. Having to go through that kind of a terrifying experience while pregnant and then having to make that kind of a choice, that must have been a very tumultuous time for all. Thank you, Rhonda, for sharing your story with us. We appreciate you. In our number 3 spot today, we have Dream. This Reddit story comes from someone who really knows how to paint quite a vivid picture. This person actually experienced their close call with death after being impaled with a fillet knife, which really is a story that I wish I could hear more about. They go on to write, quote, "I had tried to crawl up from my basement to phone 911, but I was so weak and every time I moved I started bleeding harder. I remember passing out and having the sensation like I was leaving a dark room and moving outside into the sun. I stopped panicking and this feeling of pure contentment settled over me. I was floating over a garden where all of the plants were giving off light, and I could see a huge amorphous shape above me that was made up of every color in existence, including colors I have never seen before and couldn't possibly describe. The shape seemed familiar, like I was a part of it, and it was beckoning to me and filling me with pure ecstasy and understanding as I looked at it. Then, a man who looked an awful lot like Dream from the Sandman comics, which I was obsessed with at the time, walked over to me through the garden and told me that I couldn't go home yet, that it wasn't time. I started weeping, but I was filled with this feeling of understanding, like I knew that I had to go back despite not wanting to. The man had tears streaming down his face and he took my hand and led me back to my body, which was in an ambulance. My older brother had found me and called 911. This sounds like while having one of the most horrific experiences, this person was having one of the most peaceful and tranquil moments of their life. It really is interesting what these kinds of experiences can do to our bodies and our brains. In our number 2 spot today, we have Don Piper. Don is a man who experienced death after a car accident in 2008. After making a recovery, Don was interviewed about his experience, not only because having an NDE like that is already an insane story, but because of what Don says he experienced while on the other side. He said that he went to heaven and that outside of the gates he was greeted by friends and family who he says hadn't aged at all. It wasn't until he started to go up to the gates in order to walk through that he ended up waking in his own body on Earth. About the ordeal, he said, quote, "This is a very remarkable, unique situation." He went on to say, quote, "I saw things there that I wouldn't have expected to see if I was having a dream. I saw people there that I didn't expect to see. There were a lot of things about my experience that convinced me in no uncertain terms that this is reality and this is fleeting. This is passing. I can't wait to go back there. I didn't want to come back here." That's up. In our number 1 spot today, we have Colton Burpo. Colton has a story so popular that it's actually been turned into a movie called Heaven is for Real. Basically, Colton's experience starts out while he was battling an illness. He was extremely sick and was battling to stay alive, and during this time, he is said to have had an experience in heaven. While here, he says that he not only met, but spoke with Jesus during his visit. While I'm sure they had much to talk about, one of the things they spoke about was Colton's sister, who had passed away before he had a chance to meet her. When Colton returned to his body on Earth, he was sure to share what he had experienced, which many people thought was absolutely remarkable. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you all again soon. Bye! Woo! Alright. Okay. In Valparaiso, when he had his encounter with his when he had his encounter with his god called Lord oh like, I should just give up now. If you ever travel to the area, it is very, very likely that that was difficult for me.